The Anglo-Boer War, which was fought from 1899 to 1902, shaped the trajectory of South Africa and had profound consequences for its development in the 1900s and beyond. The war is remembered on the 11th of October, and this year, online publication, in her words, hosted a dialogue to explore its devastating consequences on cultural groups. The dialogue also highlighted the issue of unmarked mass graves of black people who perished as slaves. I'm now joined by Asanda Ngwasheng, who is a research associate at the Center for Rights and Anti-Colonial Justice at the University of Sussex. Asanda, very good afternoon to you. Thanks very much for your time. One wonders whether, given that, you took this decision to commemorate this war, and we're going to get into your reasons in a moment, whether in fact wars should even be commemorated at all is one of the questions that people may ask.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I think this is a project that was a personal project that was very important to me and that I'm working on with my colleague Leslie, who is also looking into the same issue. And what was important for us was to start to have the conversation more publicly by, South Africans, for South Africans, to talk about the ways in which the Anglo-Boer War really had an impact on Black people and how Black people are placed right now, who we think we are, and, the kind of trauma, post-traumatic stress, and just pain that we have, because we often focus, unfortunately, as South Africans, on apartheid, as if apartheid is the only thing that happened to us and the only subjugation that we faced, whereas there's colonialism, which the Anglo-Boer War really demonstrates the ways in which human life and human dignity was just not even a thought for Black people or by the colonial state, which was both the English and the Boers who were coming from Netherlands at the time.
In fact, interesting you say that, because you're reminding me of as we were at Freedom Park only a week ago when there was that reception for the remains of freedom fighters who died in Zimbabwe and Zambia. Because as you go along that path to Isi-Vivan, you come across these walls which have rolls of names of people who died not only during apartheid, but during the world wars, but also the South African wars, which then underscores, the importance of what you just said. In your view, how should these people be commemorated? Be remembered?
Well, I think firstly, we need to know where the mass graves of the people who died during the Anglo-Boer War are, right? Because more than 15,000 people, Black people, died in this war, and many of them lie in unmarked graves. So Black people participated both as soldiers on the English side of the war and on the Boer side of the war, but also we were victims ourselves and spent time in concentration camps. And one of the things that really broke my heart when I read initially about the Anglo-Boer War was the fact that Black people were servants in the concentration camps. And so Boers and English people were putting each other, imprisoning each other in concentration camps. And the Black people in those camps were domestic servants to imprisoned people. And while the English and the Boers managed to, were receiving food as prisoners, right? They were receiving food, they were receiving other amenities. The Black people had to work to get food for their wives. So the men had to work for their wives, their children, and their relatives to get food. And a lot of Black people perished through hunger, perished through being killed, and all kinds of things. Also, a lot of Black people perished as, the trekkers, the trek boers as they call them, were moving through South Africa. So we now have, we've got Ndebele people who ran away from Shaka and then landed up around about the area we now call Tshwane, who then ended up as far as Mpumalanga, running away and being driven away. And there were like kind of nightly raids on villages. And so, we have all of these people now who call themselves Xhosa, Zulu, Sotho, Tswana, and all kinds of identities that are in some ways identities that are new but we have forgotten really who we are, and we are not as connected as South Africans to our original identities, and even where we embrace, which, I mean, there's nothing wrong with embracing the identities we have now, but young people don't know how we came to be. And for me, what really struck me, Vuyo, is the fact that, we have, for instance, constantly having conversations about why do prisoners get to get food? Why do prisoners get to be treated with humanity and with dignity? And when you look at the conditions that Black people were under during the Anglo-Boer War, in these concentration camps, when you look at the conditions that Black people were under during apartheid as political prisoners and so on, you begin to understand why we ended up with the constitution that we ended up, why we ended up with the human rights regime that some criticize as neoliberal, but actually is in fact as a result of the experiences that we have going all the way back to the Anglo-Boer War and even before that, where we stood as Black people and we said Black people must never be put in a position where they have to work for their food in the ways that we underwent during those concentration camps. And so when we look at the past and we understand the past, we're able to connect it and understand the present and how it is that we behave in the ways that we behave in the present. And of course, it also explains, an understanding of the Anglo-Boer War explains the deep violence that sits in our society, whether you're talking GBV or you're talking, we just had someone allegedly kill 18 people, right? So, like very recently in this country, we've got people who are constantly undergoing all kinds of violence because we sit with so much intergenerational trauma that we haven't dealt with, that we haven't even spoken about. And that's why for me, it was important that we commemorate the lives lost, that we think about what it is to be Black or to have been Black in that time and what it means to be Black now. And of course, that we remember, some of the journalists who were at the forefront, because there's Reverend Lopetema, there is Saul Blackie, who wrote the diary, the Mafikeng diary, which basically speaks to his experiences during the Anglo-Boer War and basically tells us what happened in the war in his words. And this is important because there are very few historical records of Black people in the war. There are many books written. There are kind of official documents written about the English side, the Boer side, and the empire and how it engaged with South Africa when it was taking our land effectively. But there aren't enough narratives on the very people whose lives were destroyed and whose land was being taken. And that's why this was important to engage with for me.
And which just also goes to prove just how the Anglo-Boer War got to shape South Africa as we have come to know it, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not just there. So the Anglo-Boer War basically set the path for this South Africa that belongs to English people, that belongs to Afrikaners in more ways than it belongs to the natives, to the Black people of this country. You have two groups of people who literally recruited the entire world to come and fight for the land of the Blacks. So you have, people coming as far as Canada, receiving awards. There are Canadian war memorials, there are war memorials in Canada, in the UK, all over the world commemorating this war, but there are no Black names. And where there are Black names, there are only the names of the soldiers and not the names of the Black people who died. And so I really wish and want to appeal to the government personally that they find those graves, those unmarked graves, and that they begin to build these Black narratives, that they begin to prioritize our stories being told, so that when we think of the Anglo-Boer War, we don't only think about it as, the making of the Afrikaner nation, and that this is history that belongs to us as the natives, because there's no way that a war can take place in Africa, in your country, and, nothing happens to you. And so that's why, for me, it was important to have this conversation. And I'm hoping that over the coming year, we're going to be having many more, conversations around the Black narratives of the Anglo-Boer War and why Black people should care about this war and what it tells us about who we are now and the ways in which we engage with war, with trauma, and so much more. And I think the one last thing I want to say, for you is that when we look at what's happening in Palestine, when we look at who is supporting Palestine, right? Or who is supporting Israel and who is supporting Palestine, we begin to see that this dispossession and this grouping of nations who are supporting oppression. It's not a new thing. The Canadas of this world supported the English and the Boers, etc., when they were trying to take our land. And the same thing is happening in Palestine now. And so if we don't understand what happened 125 years ago, we will not be able to understand what's happening in not only South Africa, but the globe in 2024.